Cool. Well, really happy to be here, and I'll begin by asking this question. How many people have seen the movie Castaway? For those who haven't, Tom Hanks plays a character who ends up stranded on an island in the middle of nowhere. He becomes so desperate for a relationship that eventually he leaves a bloodstained handprint on a volleyball to create Wilson. It was so tragic when Wilson drifted away. I once felt very much like this character, trapped on an island with no rescue in sight. I realized that I needed relationships in order to really know myself and grow, but I also needed to make the effort to leave that island. I needed to make an honest effort to learn how to people. My story begins shortly after I graduated from UF with a BS in chemical engineering. I thought I was an absolute rock star because I was really good at taking written exams. I figured I would be doing humanity a big favor by going into scientific research. However, I was woefully unprepared for the real-life exams I was soon to face. Because I had spent my entire school career doing basically nothing but studying and playing World of Warcraft, I knew practically nobody and lacked the soft skills to form new relationships. I believe that because I was so smart and knowledgeable, people and companies would want to associate with me. Boy, was I wrong. Because of my ego and poor soft skills, I found myself with only one job offer for a local startup company upon graduation. It was okay at first, even exciting, but I quickly learned that working in startups can be very chaotic. I'll spare you the details, but suffice it to say, the company ran out of money much more quickly than I was led to believe was possible. For a little more than a year, I had been working heavy hours and, once again, not making any effort to build connections outside of work. This, along with a bad breakup, left me hopeless, heartbroken, and unemployed with no prospects. A silver lining with these painful experiences is that I was forced to ask myself questions like, how did it come to this? Why did this happen? I began to seriously reflect on my strengths and weaknesses, and that was the catalyst for personal growth. I bet most of you have heard the saying that no person is an island, meaning nobody is totally sufficient unto themselves. How can I know myself without other people with whom to relate? How can I know if I'm kind or cruel, wise or foolish, cowardly or brave? This discovery really amazed me. We actually need to connect with other people to know ourselves. Typically, this is the point in the story where we reach a dramatic turning point. Something happens and suddenly everything is different. However, for me, I didn't begin to suddenly value relationships. It took me some years to get to this point. Although I had made no real efforts to make new connections, there were a handful of people in the Gainesville community who made an effort to help me. Because of one connection in particular, I was introduced to the world of prototyping and 3D printing, which has enabled me to build a career doing what I love. If not for that one connection, I wouldn't have ended up developing a paint pouring robot that can be controlled by anyone from anywhere in the world. Looking back at that time, my challenges always involved communication. At first, it was learning how to communicate with machines for testing LEDs. Then it was figuring out how to help my colleagues best communicate with these machines. Then it was figuring out how to best communicate with my colleagues. I used to work at the Hub, which is an incubator for those who don't know. And one day, as I was walking around, I saw a poster for a talk on emotional intelligence and decided to give it a go. Turns out emotional intelligence is critical for building relationships. A major aha moment for me was learning about the power of listening in order to build rapport with someone. Just listening to a person without thinking about what you will say next goes a long way, especially if you ask questions that show that you've heard them. It's a little selfish, But I found out that a lot of the time, the other person would begin to show interest in me if I first genuinely listened to them. The surprising thing was that a lot of the time, I found myself genuinely interested in what the other person was saying. Because of these discoveries, I found myself building relationships with lots of people in Gainesville. I even started to enjoy being around people in general. Who knew that could be more fun than being around machines? I could tell my efforts were bearing fruit when I took my car to a new mechanic one day. I was in a rush and basically just told the rep that I wanted some parts replaced as soon as possible before heading back to work. Later that day, the rep left me a message where I could tell from his voice that he was pretty unhappy. I reflected and realized I had been pretty rude to the guy. I went back the next day with the intention of building rapport with him and ended up having a great conversation that must have lasted an hour and ended up paying way less for the job than I was told to expect. How's that for value? So yeah, that felt pretty good, but in recent years, the pendulum has actually swung to the other extreme where I had more relationships than I could manage. However, not all of them were relationships that were right for me. I found myself surrounded by people who were similar to me in a lot of ways. I liked a lot of things about them, but there were also some things I didn't like. I wanted to be around different people, but recognized that if I didn't change myself, I would most likely end up in the same situation. Typically, when we dislike something about another person, it's actually a projection. For instance, if I am constantly annoyed by the arrogance of people around me, it's more likely than not that I myself tend to be arrogant. Once again, simply practicing self-awareness revealed to me areas in which I could grow. I'd like to challenge you to do the same. When you find yourself thinking negatively about another person, seriously ask yourself whether you yourself are not doing the very same thing that you dislike about this other person. It's a practice that most of us have heard about, but I find it's pretty easy to forget. I spent a fair amount of time considering what I truly value now and what I want to cultivate in this one life I've been given. It may seem harsh, but I discovered that there were some relationships that I needed to end because they were not serving these values. In most cases, I tried to make them work first. In many cases, I discovered that the other person was simply unwilling to make adjustments, and that was okay. It just meant it was time for me to go in a different direction. We only have so much energy, so many hours in the day. So if a relationship is taking energy away from what we truly value, isn't it best to end it? I'd like to encourage you yourself to take a minute to reflect on your relationships and what they say about you. I hope that they're a reflection of what you truly value. I hope that if any are not, that you can summon the courage to do something about it. All of my life, I've been a very picky person. I need things to be a certain way in order to be the best version of myself. Because of this, I wrote out a list of all the characteristics I needed in my ideal partner. I've recently been overjoyed to find a woman who satisfies this list. One time, I referred to her as adequate, which in my mind is a big compliment, but she wasn't especially pleased. Fortunately, it wasn't enough to drive her away, and we just got married. It feels so good to have all this hard work pay off, and in closing, I want to express my gratitude to all of the connections I've made in Gainesville who have helped open my eyes to the value of relationships. Thank you. Hey, hey. I don't think so.
I
Tom,
think we
Jake?
met. I'm Tom.
Tom, Jake, nice to meet
meet
you.
Jake.
So we're the only diplomat to
Oh,
Yeah.
show up.
Yeah, cool. Hey, I stand out now, right?
for sure, for sure.
So, yeah. So what's your kind of ambitions and goals? What's the
Ambitions and goals. I mean, right now, the thing that I'm working on is moving to Vienna to live with my wife. So we just got married, and that's
in,
kind of
like Vienna,
Austria.
Austria?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Cool, because that's
Not like one of those
probably
weird towns.
Vienna,
Yeah.
Mississippi.